Good morning. We're going to go ahead and start. This is Glenn Kuramoto with National Facilities Services Planning and Design Engineering. I'm here with Sandy Renshaw and Travis English. Welcome to the 2022 Commissioning Community of Practice meeting. Here's the agenda for today. First, we will highlight a few projects that were completed, and then we will review the 2021 commissioning program and see where we stand. Then we will roll out our new commissioning plan review checklist. Sandy Renshaw will be going over that in addition to the typical approach to reviewing OPRs and BODs and the key points that add value to KP based on lessons learned from past projects. Next, we will cover the updates to the KP acceptance criteria standard with the specific emphasis on the role of the engineer of record. Lastly, we will cover the updates to the KP monitoring base standard, Clockworks, the clean bill of health, and the 5 dominoes. Please type in your questions in the chat box during the presentation. We will read and answer the questions at the end during Q&A, and if time runs out, we'll answer by email. Please be sure to identify yourself in the chat so we can do this. And now I will present the metrics from the past to the current. But before I do that, I wanted to say a little bit about the program. I know in Travis's invite, he mentioned that this is the annual update on the highest commissioning standard in the world. There's a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, and in my opinion, a lot of truthfulness in that. We are pushing the envelope a bit. In most cases, a 7 out of 10 in the KP standard would be a 10 out of 10 in another standard. I think more importantly, we as commissioning practitioners need to take a step back and see that ultimately, we are testing something to assure to the customer that the design or system that we created works. There may be nuances or features that enhance the system that some customers may or may not like, but in the end, the system needs to operate to achieve what was promised, such as some thermal comfort. With that, I first wanted to start with some project highlights. The first one is the Hesperia MOB. The first MOB designed and built following the MOB Center of Excellence model. The main highlight here is that the project incorporated all the requirements under the new KP Connected Commissioning Program. Altura collaborated with Canon for the controls design. The SkySpark platform was utilized for connected commissioning. And there was an optimization period where Altura, Canon, and Climatech were able to tune the system to within the acceptance criteria. Finally, Clockworks was integrated and a clean bill of health achieved. The second highlight is the KPB second floor payroll renovation, a collaboration of Mazzetti, the engineer of record, and CBRE, the commissioning agent. The key highlight in this BMS upgrade project was the utilization of Clockworks as a connected commissioning platform. The project team communicated and planned well to implement Clockworks in a timely manner so that commissioning could be done per schedule. The final highlight is the sterile compounding pharmacy USP 797 and 800 upgrade program. The program included 109 pharmacies with the involvement of multiple architects, engineers, and commissioning agents. The tolerances for control were quite tight, especially for room pressure. The highlight here is in the gradual improvement of the process, specifically in the presentation of the final acceptance of the pharmacy in the commissioning report. But it didn't end there. SCMS proceeded to develop a document for troubleshooting guidance to help the local FacOps team after final acceptance. These three examples showcase the intent of the KP commissioning program, which is to continuously improve the process with the result of delivering our systems faster and better. And now onto the metrics. There were 461 projects in 2019. 75 of those required commissioning. 49 of the 75 submitted final commissioning reports. Of the 49, 26 met the minimum standard for completion. 65% of filed commissioning reports were acceptable. This is a 35% success rate for projects requiring commissioning. Here's the commissioning data from 2020, and it shows a great improvement. The result was an 85% success rate of filed reports, 53% success for projects requiring commissioning. Here's where we are for 2021. 83% success for filed reports and 64% for projects. Of course, the goal is 100% success rate, but these are huge improvements. Now I will hand it over to Sandy to go over the commissioning plan review checklist.
All right. Thanks, Glenn. Hey, everybody. Good morning. Just a reminder, I think Travis sent something out and Glenn did too, but if you have any questions, let's make sure we're putting them into the chat. So we all know the commissioning plan lays out the roadmap and framework for the commissioning process, and it's an important tool. Kaiser Permanente standards require a commissioning plan to be provided for all projects that require commissioning. Our team, planning and design, performs a review of this plan. And this is our new plan review checklist. Some of you have seen this already because we started using it. And I'm going to go over a couple of changes. If you look at the checklist on the left side of the screen, some of that, some pretty standard stuff. But what I will say is we review hundreds of projects, hundreds of commissioning plans, and sometimes we don't know much about a project until we see this plan. So the very top item there sometimes gets overlooked. General project information. Just give us a little narrative of the project. I mean, got a trick I used to do when I was a commissioning agent is I would copy the narrative from the architect engineer's BOD, and then you can edit that. And that kind of tells a little bit of a story. The next two, not much changes. Look at the point where we talk about commissioning process activities, schedules, and prerequisites. What we're really looking for here, obviously, you have to work with the contractor to develop a schedule, but we're looking to get something into the plan that kind of sets out the schedule of what you're going to do. And then, as you know, we expect that to be in the contractor's schedule because we really want only one schedule. We've got a number of connected commissioning checks, plans for automated functional testing, and not just saying, hey, we're going to do automated functional testing. Yeah, I know you are, but kind of talk a little bit about how you're going to do it. You know, how you're going to do the trending. What connected commissioning platform are you going to use? The Clockworks integration tasks. And obviously the plan to collect data. And so now one of the big new ones is on the right side of your screen, the large paragraph, and this is the 5 dominoes for connected commissioning. And we put these together because these kind of map out the success, and we don't expect you to necessarily do this, but we want it addressed in the plan. We want it addressed in the schedule. Obviously, a very important part is to have IT approving the controls design. Submittals with point-to-point diagrams. No, you're not going to have that submittal when you write your plan, but just discuss that. Control system is operational. That's something we want in the schedule. Control server active on the Kaiser network. That's probably a little bit more for greenfield or new buildings, because if you're an existing building, you would expect that to happen. And then the connected commissioning data analytics platform. As you know, we're also using this checklist to perform a final verification of the project acceptance criteria. And we're going to cover acceptance criteria in just a few slides. So first, I'm going to take a few minutes to review an important part of the commissioning process, OPR and BOD review. The owner's project, excuse me, the owner's project requirements is developed at the onset of a project. The OPR details the functional requirements of a project and the expectations of how it will be used and operated. This includes, but it's not limited to, project goals, measurable performance criteria, cost considerations, benchmarks, success criteria, and supporting information. The basis of design is a document that records the concepts, calculations, decisions, and product selections used to meet the owner's project requirements and satisfy all applicable regulatory requirements, standards, and guidelines. The document includes both narrative descriptions and items that support the design process, such as load calculations, a load profile, water usage calculations, lighting photometrics, equipment cut sheets, etc. You get the idea. So why I'm saying all this, I know this is kind of a review for you, and you guys obviously know what all this stuff is. But what I want to point out is that it's the commissioning agent's role to review the OPR and to verify that those concepts and energy targets are carried forward into the BOD and that they're ultimately incorporated into the design. And then as the commissioning agent, you would also review the acceptance criteria to verify that it is appropriate to validate the performance and energy goals. And speaking of acceptance criteria, let's take some time to jump into this and review our standard and expectations. So we've had acceptance criteria in our standard since, I said 2019. Would you concur?
Yeah.
Okay, Travis concurs. Its purpose is to help prove that systems and equipment are in control. And our expectations are that the design engineer will take the acceptance criteria and edit it for the project and include any energy efficiency goals. Some engineers have done this, but for the most time, we see a copy of our criteria published for the project. As you can see from this slide, either the systems and equipment did not pass the acceptance criteria or it wasn't communicated effectively. And just so you know how we came up with this slide, we did an audit of all of the projects in 2021 and looked at the acceptance criteria and looked at what passed, what didn't pass. And as you can see, I mean, the original criteria passed 46%. Criteria revised then passed 27%. And another 27%, more than a quarter of the acceptance criteria, effectively were not shown. Here's some more details from our audit. On the original criteria passing, the non-trended criteria were the most successful. 66% passing, 30% revised then passed. On criteria that was revised and then passed, which was obviously very common in the efficiency criteria, 50% were changed then passed, and only 9% of the efficiency criteria passed the original form. And then turn down, 54% of turn down criteria were not demonstrated. So this is the update to our 2022 acceptance criteria standard. So I want to take a minute to talk about the engineer of records responsibility here. Many of you got action items from an audit that we did towards the end of last year. We took 70 projects that were in flight and audited them for acceptance criteria to make sure that they're aligned. I think most of the PMs, when Travis sent out action items, sent them to the commissioning agents and said, hey, fix this. Well, we really want to be clear that it's the engineer of records really responsibility to develop the acceptance criteria. You as the commissioning agent will have input on that, and you're also the controls designer, but it's really, they own the design. And so we want them to develop that. So the changes here, and I'll just read through them. The acceptance criteria, I mean, traditionally the engineer of record has put that into the BOD, and that's probably good for the beginning to start talking about it. But we want the acceptance criteria as part of the contract documents, which means we want them on the engineer of records plans. You could also do it in a specification section. And finally, you could do a stamped and signed dated memo from the engineer of record to the commissioning agent. And then your job is obviously, as we talked about, to review those, make sure that they are applicable for the design. And when I say applicable, I mean, you can think about this. If we set the acceptance criteria too loose, I mean, we'll pass in a heartbeat, but then we're going to have a lot of problems. And if, on the other side, if we have it too tight, we're not going to pass at all. So once you have accepted the acceptance criteria, you put it in the commissioning plan, and I would put it as an appendix. That way, if you have to change it, you don't have to rewrite the whole plan. And then as we're doing our commissioning plan review, we will be checking the acceptance criteria. So there are certain minimum acceptance criteria, and they've really always been there. We're just trying to call it out because we, in our audit, had not seen all of them shown. So you can see the table to the right, which displays the minimum level of acceptance criteria. Any system listed in the table shall have at least one acceptance criteria for each of the indicated functions: system in control, turn down, and efficiency. The commissioning team may define additional criteria which demonstrate successful operations. And minimum non-trended acceptance criteria is right below the table. We've also instituted an acceptance criteria change process. So once approved and posted, changes for the acceptance criteria will go through a formal process, just like you were doing a change order to the project. We would expect to identify a reason for the change. As we said before, it could be, an incorrect estimation of the performance and design, criteria too tight, maybe criteria too loose. The recommended change. The revised acceptance criteria must be reviewed and approved by engineer of record, controls designer, commissioning agent, and the Kaiser NFS planning and design engineer. And then would revise once approved, you would revise the engineer of records plans or specifications with the new criteria and update the commissioning plan. So let's talk about graphics. We really previously did not have any acceptance criteria for graphics. Last year, we had to help with the operation of many of our buildings. What we found is that the graphics in many cases were extremely hard to follow or were not labeled correctly. So we're adding this to the acceptance criteria. So all spaces need to have the correct room name and number on the graphics, and this matches the facility naming convention. Floor plan shall have a link to the terminal unit, terminal unit naming shall match the KP standards and be labeled on the zone thermostat. This information is changed on the facility as-built drawings. And if the plans are not able to be updated, a conversion table should be provided. And when we're looking at equipment, all graphics shall meet the KP standards and represent the actual equipment installed and contain the points listed on the drawings. Verified proper equipment control can be achieved from the graphic. So there are not really any major updates to Clockworks, but we do have one change to our clean bill of health. The change to the clean bill of health is really in the schedule. We expect the clean bill of health to be achieved prior to final completion of the project. Previously, we had stated this had to be by substantial completion, so we loosened that up a little bit. I know you've seen this, so I kind of presented this in the podcast that I did, and this is the Clockworks Commissioning Bill of Health dashboard. This happens to be for the Hesperia project. As you can see, we meet the energy criteria, but we're slightly over on comfort and maintenance. And this is available for you while you're doing your commissioning work to do a check when you're trying to achieve the clean bill of health. So before I turn it over to Travis for final thoughts, I want to mention two important items regarding the controls design by the commissioning agent. Number one, controls design is not part of the commissioning process. It is design work. To date, this process has actually been working well, and the commissioning agents who are doing the controls design have done a great job. So good job, guys. Number two, you really have to be aligned under the architect of record when you're doing controls design. And so how that looks is you should really be signing two contracts. The controls design portion would be under the architect of record. And then the standard commissioning services contract would be direct with Kaiser Permanente, as it always has been. And now, some final thoughts from our fearless leader of innovation and energy efficiency, Travis English. Round of applause.
Come back. Those are the questions that have come in.
Do you want me to just read those?
Yeah. Oh, Sandy never turned his camera on. So I'm gonna turn.
Okay,
That's fine.
you're on.
I think I'm on. All right.
Yeah, I'm here.
So first off, thanks everyone for coming and spending a little time with us this morning. We blocked out a ton of time, so we're hoping that we're going to give a significant amount of this back. We are going to make this recording available. We'll try to make it available to everyone. Last year we posted it on YouTube, and I think we had more views over the course of the year than we had attendees at the actual session. So that it does become something that sort of records where we're at with our commissioning program, in the beginning of the year, which I think is a good thing. So I want to go back to sort of where Glenn started in talking about this audacious thing that we put into the invite that talks about, this is the annual update for the highest commissioning standard in the world. And that is a phrase that, while it is audacious and meant to be so, we believe it's very true. So I'll give you a little bit of the backstory on that if you haven't been involved in the commissioning program for that period of time. We actually started what I consider our modern commissioning program in 2017. And 2017 was the year that we first got eBuilder. And so that was the first year that we at the national level could actually check every project in terms of where they at on commissioning. Very simply, any project where we were paying for commissioning should file a commissioning report, right? That's just sort of, hopefully that makes sense to everyone. And so under that criteria, we checked it. Did they in fact file a commissioning report? Do we have a commissioning report in the project documentation? And then we developed what I still think is a pretty simple checklist about successful commissioning. Item number one is 4 points. for successful commissioning. Item number one, do they have an issues log? Item number two, are all the issues on the issues log closed out, shown as being resolved? Item number three, did they go through an acceptance period with some data from the system? And then item number four, does the data from the system show that the systems are functioning according to the design intent? So that's our sort of simple 4-part checklist for successful commissioning. In the first year that we looked at commissioning reports filed in eBuilder, the results were dismal. Right? Less than 10% of the commissioning reports or less than 10% of the projects that required commissioning actually filed reports which met the criteria for successful commissioning. And so that right there is what we hang the hat on in terms of this being the toughest commissioning standard in the world. I don't think there's any other owner, well, it's not that I don't think, we've looked, and there's no other owner in the world that passes or fails commissioning reports based on that simple checklist. There's no industry standard that passes or fails commissioning based on that simple checklist. There's no commissioning firm anywhere on the planet that'll tell you that they pass or fail their own commissioning efforts based on that simple criteria. File a report, resolve all the issues, and demonstrate that the systems are working according to the design intent. Pretty simple checklist, but you can see that we're struggling to get to success. My boss says to me every year, why are we not at 100%? And we started at less than 10%. And if you watched Glenn Kuramoto's slides in the beginning, 2019, 35% of the projects that required commissioning actually filed a report that qualifies as successful commissioning. This last year, we were at 2/3. And so I think that's as good as it gets. Nobody else is even measuring their commissioning success. And so I'm very proud that we're at 2/3. And that's why the other gag that Glenn likes to say is, he says, look, if you're a 7 in the Kaiser commissioning program, then you're a 10 anywhere else. And I think that's true. Or maybe if you're a 6.6 in the Kaiser program, then you're a 10 anywhere else. But I do want to make sure to put in the ear of all of the commissioning providers that are on this call that we know that we're running the toughest commissioning program that we're aware of, and that there is a lot of learning that's going on. Really, we're still in the first 5 years of this. We're still in the first 5 years of trying to have a metric for commissioning success and pass that metric for commissioning success. And so I know I was talking to one of our commissioning providers, end of last year, early this year, and they said, well, every year, we do the best work that we've ever done, and then every year in January, you guys hold your little YouTube meeting and tell us that all the work is crap. And I hope it comes across as that we are in this learning period. We're in sort of the first 5 years of putting a really high quality program together. There's going to be lessons learned, but also I want to say that I'm amazingly proud of the quality that we have in our commissioning program. And I do brag to our leadership and to our bosses that we're actually, I think everyone in the industry is paying for commissioning, and I think we are getting quality out of what we're paying for in a very meaningful way that's unique. And so I hope you're all kind of honored to be on this call. And I do believe that we're working with kind of the best of the best and getting the best out of it. So with that, I think you got the questions lined up out of the chat.
You want me to? I'll.
Why don't you go ahead and take the hot seat?
And then
I want the hot seat. All right.
Why don't I say the question, you guys answer?
And you guys, okay.
Let me get over there. Okay.
I think the first one is a comment.
Yeah, let me.
You want to?
And then you guys want to sit down?
Okay, you can sit here. We can. Eric, come on, join us.
Okay. First question or statement came from Chris Miller, P2S. Would discharge air temperature not turn up increase in set point at night and morning startup? I think that has to do with a supplier temperature reset scheme and our acceptance criteria. Do you guys want to?
Well, I mean,
and I think it's more of a statement, but
that's more of a statement, and I would expect if you're doing like a morning warm up, that's more of a functional test procedure. Okay, morning warm up, unit's going to go to heating, you know, boxes are commanded open. I don't know that that would necessarily be an acceptance criteria. I mean, discharge air temperature and control, and I think, Chris, you put something else further about plus or minus 1 degree. You know, can you achieve plus or minus 2 degrees? You know, that was in our standard for a long time. And we actually revised that when we got to, you know, Claremont Mesa and Hesperia, because we found that DX rooftop units, there's no way in the planet that they could do that. Nobody could do it. And we ended up with, yeah.
Okay, so I do need, Chris, actually, it's actually the 9th question, but he added a clarification in there. Plus or minus 1.0 discharge air, 1 degree discharge air temperatures to set point are possible with proper valve selection and tuning, and not with an expensive energy valve or PICCVs. I have to say it. Chris Miller, P2S did make it work. They got within a half a degree on Baldwin Park, MOB1. So he's rebuttal. He's kind of arguing with you there.
He's got the secret to plus or minus 1, huh?
You did an audit when we were talking about rooftop units of all of our systems on Clockworks, and I mean,
We did. We pulled. We went in and pulled a year's worth of data for, I think, about 10 rooftop package units, and we had set point data and supplier temperature data, and that's where we actually came up with this. It's like plus or minus 5 for 80% of data. It's really quite poor.
but the chill water coiled units, I mean,
The chill water coil units were significantly better than the DX units.
So this is a chilled water unit,
Right.
With Chris's.
but sure, PID loop tuning, like you said, is critical, and you know, valve selection.
So here's my opinion. It can be done. It causes a lot of more team collaboration and involvement. I have to say we have a good team on Baldwin Park. We have a good engineer. We got basically 2 good commissioning agents, SCMS and Altura. P2S is the engineer, and they made it work. And the controls contractor, we have a good KP team, Denny Brown and Pascal on site. So everyone pitched in my opinion, but that's for Chris to present at a later date.
Okay.
Next question. Brad Tuttle, the acceptance criteria shown is dated 12/15/21. Please confirm this version is uploaded to InfoZone.
It's not.
As it's not. It will be. Today was the first presentation of it.
Right.
Well, we've sent it out to the teams, and so I think we internally, our process of posting to InfoZone, requires some approvals and requires going up through things, and so it's not as fluid. I wish we could just have that be a standing document where we could just post an update to it every 2 months or whatever it is, because I know internal to us, as we learn about acceptance criteria that are unfeasible or whatever, we're updating that document. So we update that document several times a year, and we have not been able to post that out to InfoZone on a routine basis. Right. So that's definitely on our side. I think in any case, if you're doing commissioning for Kaiser, feel free to ask that. We probably have a version. You said the version that's on this slide deck is voted 12.
That was the last version that we had. Because remember, as a team,
I think if you look in our directory, it was updated in January, though. I think there's at least a change.
Anyway,
So,
Brad, we will upload that to InfoZone, and I also have to upload the newest version of the Clockworks Clean Bill of Health with the one minor change that says Clean Bill of Health by final project completion instead of substantial completion. So, and yes, we will be uploading those.
Next question from Dave Lockhart regarding facilities question. For commissioning changes, Does operations have an opportunity to recommend changes to commissioning standards? During a project, when would this take place? Thanks.
I mean, our standards are on InfoZone, Dave. So, I mean, if there is something that facilities would like to recommend, I mean, absolutely, we would be all ears. We should be collaborating and working hand in hand with you guys. So, I mean, you could propose a change to that anytime. If it's project specific, I would say once you're reviewing the commissioning plan, which is the roadmap of how we're doing it, if there's something that needs to be in there, you could change it. And I guess lastly, and we're going to talk about this with engineers, is OPR review. The OPR has a number of commissioning requirements in it, and that's really developed at the onset of the project. So that would even be the most appropriate time to make any kind of change or special request, because that way the commissioning agent could include that in their bid.
And 2022 is going to be a year where on the NFS side, particularly for plant maintenance projects, so if you're working in existing buildings, plant maintenance projects, we're tightening up our OPR process in the NFS side of the house.
So the next question actually ties in kind of with that, Travis, from Brad Tuttle. Is there a plan to have a control system design meeting / presentation? So I think, in other words, an engineering community of practice.
There's not a plan, but I think it's a great idea. Yeah, one of the things that I know we want to accomplish this year is that we have sort of established this Tritium Niagara server that we have, and so there's controls like a graphic standard up there on that. We need to find some way of disseminating that out to everyone who's doing controls design, so that it's immediately reusable. And so I do think that I think it would be helpful to have some sort of get together where we talk through controls design and just the transferability. You know, we're talking more and more about standardization of controls design, but that's going to require some effective communication loops that aren't, we don't have this in place perfectly.
Right. Well, and we do have the BAS architecture standard that I've been working on with Keith Collum and with our IT and network designers. And we actually have an agreement and a draft in place, and we've got about 6 projects that were targeted as pilot projects, and IT wants to see how those projects are designed and installed and operated. And then once they bless that, we will roll that out.
And we have the point naming, and for actually, if you're doing a new build medical office building, that's the easiest, right? We actually have pretty good standards in place for that. And so, but there still is some dissemination. You know, to Brad's point, I think he's normally doing controls design on projects that don't fit either of those molds, and so we give you some
Retrofit or IME projects.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I want to kind of, Brad had a piggyback question, but Chris made a statement towards that question. I think it would be good if I say it and then have you, Travis and Sandy, kind of offer your comment on this. So Brad asked, please clarify how the building energy performance goals affect the commissioning and acceptance criteria process. Chris mentioned, Brad, the energy performance goals, commissioning and acceptance criteria should go hand in hand, and Brad agreed after that, but do you have any thoughts on that, Travis, Sandy?
Well, this is so just palms up and dirty laundry out. I am dreading. We are going to have a design community of practice meeting at some point early this year, and frankly, I'm just full of dread about what that looks like. What we've rolled out, and I think what Brad is referring to, is that last week or the week before, we issued for the first time in Kaiser's history, and I think it's pretty unprecedented in the industry. We issued out energy targets for plant maintenance projects. In other words, if you're doing an air handling system in an existing building, then we put a target out there that says at 70 degrees, your fan energy should not exceed this much. At 80 degrees, your fan energy should not exceed this much. And so we have those targets out. Yeah, he's got them on the screen now. And so that really puts an onus on the design engineer to check the design, to say, look, listen, Mr. Design Engineer, how much cooling energy does your design use at 75 degrees? How much heating energy does your design use at 80 degrees, right? And actually have that. And that's going to be very difficult because, to be honest with you, most design engineers, or many design, I won't say most, but many design engineers, including my staff, don't know how to check against those targets. And it's not as easy as it sounds. And so that's, again, but those targets come straight off of our acceptance criteria, right? And what we do know about the targets is that they're perfectly viable. They actually work in our buildings, but it's really hard to check a design against those and sort of write those into your basis of design. So that's something we're going to go through this year. We're just going to rip the Band-Aid off and just go through it as painfully as we need.
I wanted to add too that as you're, when you're looking at acceptance criteria for that, you're the commissioning agent. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, okay, how am I going to validate this? Well, yeah, it's going to be hard unless you have, natural gas metering, flow meters, ways to calculate BTUs, looking at energy meters on a chiller. All of that metering has to be in place. Otherwise, all we can do is do a, back of the envelope calculation to verify that this is occurring.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think specifically to Brad's question, he's like, what responsibility does the commissioning agent have to these energy targets, these component energy targets? And I would say what you were saying during the presentation. This is design, guys. Engineer of record has to think through this stuff. There's nobody else that can think through this stuff than the engineer of record.
Right. And then the commissioning agent, as quality control, quality assurance,
they'll measure it.
Is verifying that with the acceptance criteria that's happening.
Right.
Right. Next question, Jim Meacham, Altura. Is it a requirement or suggestion that the controls design portion of the commissioning contract be direct to the architect? This would be a change from how we have previously contracted this work.
I think we need to talk through that region by region and contract manager by contract manager. So I'll tell you the two lines of thinking. Sandy and I were just debating this morning. Right? The first line of thinking is that if the owner hires an outside consultant and says, hey, you have to use this outside consultant on the project, and that gives the design professional, who's supposed to be responsible for all things design, essentially an out. Oh, the owner's consultant forced me to do this, and therefore I'm not responsible for that aspect of the design. The rebuttal to that is that in Kaiser, we do that all the time. We tell you that you have to use dirt walls. We tell you that you have to use certain exterior systems. We tell you that you have to use. So we levy all these contracts, or we levy all these parties onto the design engineer, and then still expect them to maintain accountability and maintain responsibility. So we've seen that contracting vehicle, and Jim, I know you've done some of the work. And so we've seen that contracting vehicle structured, I think, multiple ways. To Sandy's point, we do have some internal voices in our contracts team, very adamant, that says that if the commissioning agent is going to be the controls designer, that they are a member of the design team, and they should have a contractual allocation into that design team.
Right, and to date, there hasn't been a problem, and that's probably why it hasn't been a big deal. If there were an issue and everybody's pointing fingers, you could have a design team that said, "Hey, this is on you," and that's what Travis is alluding to, that we just want to make sure we're aligned with our contracting team by the various regions.
Next question, Ross Namaranian from iFactor. Does Clockwork connectivity require for all projects, even small remodel projects? What is the MEOR responsibility?
What's the dollar amount that we said? Is it?
Okay, so Clockworks is required by our control standard anytime you're spending more than $250,000 in control. So if you're doing a remodel project, then absolutely not. It's not required. Unless you're spending over $250,000 in control.
Right. I mean, I know we're trying to get Clockworks deployed onto every building, but yes, obviously, if you have a very small project, it doesn't make sense. And what are the MEOR's responsibilities? So there is I do have a document on that. It's on the Clean Bill of Health document, and you really can't see that too well, but part of the responsibility is to get information to Clockworks, like the basis of design, your drawings, your contract drawings, the control shop drawings, access to the BMS. And so really, as the designer, you would really more on probably in your architecture, your controls, just a note alerting that Clockworks is going to be deployed, and that it's really more getting the information into Clockworks and giving them a connectivity, which is, basically, they connect in and have an IP address, and they start pulling points off the BAS.
So I want to go to this next Jim Meacham again, and piggybacking onto the contract question that he asked earlier. The reality is the finger pointing can happen either way, so I don't think the contracting mechanism matters too much in practice. Might just make it more complicated. But let me, there's a back and forth between Jim Meacham and Philip Wright. Philip Wright writes, my experience with controls design leads me to agree that having the controls design under the AE is to the advantage of the project. There's a more seamless relationship getting the design done and good coordination with the engineer. Jim Meacham says some healthy tension in having the commissioning push the design engineer to deliver the performance targets. So any thoughts on that?
I don't want to pretend that there's very often the other way works just fine. And so I'm not sure that there is a sort of one size fits all correct answer for that.
I do have one.
Yeah.
So when you think about it, Jim, and I mean, you've done a lot of projects, and I know that SCMS has done them too. We're looking at this more as an interactive design process.
Right.
We don't want people working in silos. We've got the design engineer who's responsible for the design and the commissioning agent responsible for the controls design. You have to work hand in hand with that, as you know, and that has worked well on our projects. I don't know of any that have been problems.
No, and we also have the checks in place. I think, having the commissioning plan check that we have in place, at a minimum, that should be kind of by the time we get to the commissioning plan, we're done with construction documents. We should have a set of acceptance criteria by our engineer of record. We should have a set of controls documentation that is at minimum co-stamped by the commissioning agent and the engineer of record. And then those acceptance criteria are copied into the commissioning plan. That's a decent set of checksums, right? So if you make it through that sort of gauntlet and there's still major coordination issues, I don't know. I don't know what contract language is going to say, but God help you all at that point.
Well, and then to boot, we have the data analytics
Right.
to prove that it works.
So I think Chris Miller with P2S did make a statement that I think it kind of agrees with your statement that he's working with Altura Kellen and it's going well. And they push each other, in my opinion. I've seen, but here's my take on it, and from my observation, it's not all hunky-dory, kumbaya, or it's not a really nice walk. If anyone is thinking that would happen, that's not reality. Reality, there's a little tension, as Jim said, and there's a little back and forth, a little bit of, hey, I don't want to take that liability, you take it, and then along the way, for some reason, everything kind of comes together. That's what I saw. The first one out gets punched in the face, in my opinion, but in the end, we're walking together. I mean, not, there's some missteps, but I think the process does work and we get there. Jim says healthy tension, Glenn. So the next thing that was brought up here, Chris Miller, any way of having more than 3 months of data stored on Clockworks? It would be good to see annual data and changes over time. Josh Lukens with KGS Clockworks responded, we keep the data forever. You'll have to access it through the reporting module instead of analysis builder. Give Josh a call, Chris, if you need help pulling larger data sets.
Yeah, it's there forever. So we've been able to pull 2-year data blocks and more. I mean, yeah, absolutely. It is a different engine. If you're just using analysis builder in Clockworks, then that's where the 90-day limit kicks in. I think Clockworks, and Josh is online, and it's probably a separate conversation, but I think Clockworks is also working on some API connectivity stuff that we should hear about in the next year.
There was a statement that Chris Miller made in regard to the graphics standards that Altura and Keith Collum are working on, and Keith did provide a comment after that. We do have a style guide document for graphics that has been shared with Ben Apollinario. All JCI graphics are from JCI India. Kaiser only has some screenshots. Any comment on that? I've seen the graphics.
Have you seen that style? I'm not familiar with the style guide. Have we seen that?
I haven't seen the style guide, but I've seen the screenshots that Keith has provided and Ben provided to us, and it's good stuff, but I haven't seen the style guide.
We know that we need to do more of that this year. So that's on my team's goals list this year is to put together some sort of, as much as we can, sort of documentation on those graphic standards and expectations. And what's been done. We don't want wheels redone. That's the whole point here.
So Chris added another comment regarding the healthy tension, as long as it does not become adversarial. Well, that's why we have people like Danny Brown and Pascal to kind of umpire that. Has the issue, Brad Tuttle asked a question, has the issue of onboarding Clockworks prior to functional testing, especially in an equipment change-out project or a major infrastructure project, been resolved? Our understanding is that if Clockworks cannot be onboarded, then the alternate FDD plus A or MBCX platform would need to be deployed.
So I think that, I don't know if you're asking if we would be doing that to use Clockworks as the connected commissioning platform, which you certainly could do.
We actually have examples.
Well, that was one of the projects that was we said in the beginning, it was an East Coast project, and they actually did use.
Portland.
Oh, was it Portland? Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. And that requires more collaboration with the project team and the Kaiser project manager. It means you've got to get Clockworks onboarded right away, get them the information that they need as early as possible, and let them know that you are intending to use Clockworks as your connected commissioning platform. If you're not using Clockworks as your connected commissioning platform, then that's why we have the Clean Bill of Health have extended that timeline to project completion, because that's when everything's being turned over to us and the facilities guys, and the Clean Bill of Health would be appropriate or applicable.
I think though, I think what Brad's question is, has it been worked out to have Clockworks essentially up and running and producing diagnostics prior to FPTs? And the answer is yes. It's 100% a schedule thing. But we do have project examples that do that. Mm-hmm. It has to be in the schedule, and those things have to. That's where we talk about the 5 dominoes. Those dominoes need to fall in the right order at the right times. But we actually have kind of a growing list of examples. There was the Portland stuff. There's
I got an example.
Roseville also, right? At the Roseville Med Center, most of the commissioning that they do when they bring new stuff on board, they're the commissioning agent. I don't know if CMO's online, but yeah, they've been successful with that.
Oh, we had an example at Panorama City. So we had a sterile compounding pharmacy, which is about 800 square feet. But our Clockworks component is about 20,000 square feet. So the main focus of the Clockworks, the need for the project was a sterile compounding pharmacy. This can be worked out with Josh or the Clockworks KGS team, where we prioritize that area, and we would get the diagnostics needed for that area while they work on the other areas. So that's a possibility. On top of that, Nick Gajewski did provide more clarification on the 3-month query. You can also query an analysis builder older periods of time, just 90 days at a time. And yes, regarding the API. So I've done it before. If you do pick a date that's outside of 90 days, there's going to be an error message that Clockworks spits out. You can disregard that. You could, as long as you go back in time, if you want. We're in February right now. If you wanted something in July, you got to go back to, say, June 1st to August 1st time period to get that data. If you left the end date as February 8th, you're not going to get anything. So
Nick is on the call. He said yes to API.
And yes, regarding the API.
I know there's been some inquiry on that.
Jim Meacham said, thanks for all of the hard work by everyone to drive the commissioning industry forward. This is challenging, meaningful work. Agree, Jim.
Get it right, Jim.
Next one, Brad Tuttle. So Clockworks is able to onboard a single AHU, or do we have to wait for the entire campus to be complete? No, you don't have to wait. This is my understanding, and if this is not the understanding, Josh or Nick, can you put in the chat something? My understanding is that if we are onboarding an entire campus, that there is a process for that, but with the Clockworks KGS team, for that single AHU and that area that it affects, they're able to prioritize the onboarding of that AHU, at least as on analysis builder, to make it visible to you, as you do your commissioning, and then they can onboard the other parts of the campus.
And hasn't a lot of that work been done in buildings or sites that already have Clockworks, and then So if you're changing out AHU 7 in a site that already has Clockworks, that's a little bit different story, right?
Well, I haven't completely come across that as far as how that is handled. So, for example, in Hawaii, they have Clockworks, and we are doing work. However, Hawaii is paying the annual fee
Right.
for Clockworks. So what is happening is when a new project is put on, I don't believe we're getting, you know, the new points. We're getting just populating the old points. So I believe so. There's another 5 cents a square foot fee, I think. But I don't know if that's completely. I think it is happening on the greater scale, on the newer projects, but
I think it's more of a phasing thing.
more of a phasing. Yeah. So that has to be talked about and worked out with, you know, with the team.
Right.
Here we go. Brian Andrade. Has there been any more discussion or guidance on what third-party equipment gets bench tested prior to delivery? Good question. An example, a AHU that might have its own internal controls and sequences. It's a good question.
That is a great question. And we started out with more of a hard line on this, thinking that it was just going to be really easy. And then we ran into equipment manufacturers that said, sure, you know, pay us $50,000 and you can come do a factory test, but no, you can't connect to that black box we're using for control. So I think this is something that we are continuously having conversations with the equipment vendors on what we can and cannot achieve. And it has been a little challenging to date, but I would think that we are going to make progress in that. I mean, look at where, you know, just AI in general is going. You know, the other way, sure, you could have your rooftop unit show up, and when it's in the contractor's yard, you might be able to, you know, get a power pack and power it up. That could work. I know that Train told us that the challenges with some of their units is on startup. It actually looks for other components in the system, so it is much more difficult. But yes, we are trying to move that forward. I don't have anything better to say.
I think it's important to I think everyone that I talk to about this, I blame Jim Meacham for this one, whether he's responsible or not. I'll give him credit for the quote every time. And I think the quote was something to the effect of, listen, why would I allow a controller into my building without being damn sure that I know that it's going to do what it says it's going to do when it connects up? Why wouldn't I put my hands on that thing, touch it, and make sure that the points that are supposed to be read-write are actually read-write before I allow it into my damn building? And so that's the vision there. The sort of vision or the intent behind this whole process is exactly that. We went through a 5-year period where we were putting controllers into buildings, and the damn controllers didn't do what they were. You know, you could specify them, you could submit them, and then they get out to the field and they're just, you know, they're just wrong, and the points that are supposed to be read-write are not read-write, and the only guy that knows how to service the controller is somewhere in Timbuktu, Wisconsin, and so we just went through that too long. So I think you have to, the way that our standard reads, you have to bear in mind that vision. You know, let's make sure that that controller is going to do what it says it's going to do before we put it into the building, and that has been nothing short of a challenge. The equipment manufacturers don't want to do it. Whoever's making the controllers don't want to do it. We've seen some success stories. We can talk about some of the success.
Oh yeah, I know that. I mean, SCMS developed a bench.
Right.
I think that was one at Baldwin Park. SC Engineers did a bench testing at a control contractor shop.
Pacific? Aren't they taking units and holding them off-site and testing them? Yeah.
Right.
So I mean, we've seen some success stories to that vision.
One thing I want to add, though, there are certain sequences, and I'm trying to remember what they were, where it involves outside simulation, I guess is the best way to say that. If you can simulate within the program itself, easy on a bench test. But when you have to simulate any kind of conditions where you need I don't know, I can't name it. It's sensor input. It was a recent project, but the gist of what we're intending here is that on the bench test, in our past problems that we've had is that the more obvious sequences such as economize or discharge air temperature, these sequences were not being when our units are at the site, they're not working, bottom line. And so my take on this is that the bench test to get what we can get as far as much of the controller programming tested as possible, documented that in a report of what was not gotten, which part of the sequence, which I believe Shadpur did in their report, and I believe Sindoni too, so we know what we need to test and simulate in the field. But that's, to me, about 90% is already done by the time that controller and that unit gets to the site. Yeah. So, Nick, let's see with KGS Clockworks clarified a little further on the question from Brad regarding the single AHU. Yeah, I forgot about this. There is an addendum to the pricing from KGS Clockworks. So this is what Nick says. There is some language in our master services agreement on this that I don't think has made it into the program handbook about phased projects and Clockworks onboarding costs. Multi-phase projects may have additional expense on our end. Example given, 24 phases, one AHU at a time, does have a different PM component, as you can probably understand. I would recommend primarily that the phasing be planned out as early as possible in advance, and that be incorporated into scope, costs, and project expectations.
Right. Yeah, good point.
Yeah. So what I do want to kind of make it, a little, I don't know, translate a little. In the master services agreement, KGS Clockworks has a list of dollar values per equipment. For air handler, it's about $500 or so. It's in the best interest of the team and the and Clockworks and Kaiser that you just don't onboard just for $500 for that one air handler. That air handler serves multiple zones and a square footage, so that square footage should be part of that onboarding. So yeah, the cost is not $500, but if, for example, there's already a service in place, it is only $500. You already have the zones in place. So if that helps. All right. Josh Lukens added a little bit more. I think let me just say it. Nick covered phase projects above, but if you are changing out just one unit in an entire building, there are some options on how to get this into Clockworks. Reach out to Josh Lukens, and they'll get something figured out. So engagement of KGS Clockworks via Josh Lukens, who covers the Western area, is the way to go. That was the last one. Any other questions?
I'm good to close. I had hoped that we could give a big chunk of this time back. So we are going to post this. We'll try to make this available as a record of sort of where we're at, including the Q&A. We'll try to get the whole thing posted so that everyone can see it. I think everyone on the call knows where to find us. And so thanks again for everyone's hard work, and making this program what it is.
And if there are more questions, please reach out to Glenn, Travis, or myself.